I'm George Martorano. I'm out in the free world after being in a cage for a very, very, very long time. I said 3 varies, that means each vary was a decade. And that's 3 decades, over 30 years. First progress report I ever received in solitary, my release date said released upon death, in black and white. Benny the Gimp D. Simone. He was a gangster. And he used to like to take me and buy me ice cream. One day a car pulled up and they killed him. They blew him away. So now my father's only 19 and that's how he started getting his respect. He tracked each one of them down. Father didn't kill him. He wasn't a killer then. And he beat them bad, put them all in the hospital. And that's how he got his reputation, and that's how people started knowing. When he got out of prison, he was on probation. We came back to the city because everything burned down. The house burned down, the farm burned down, everything burned down. So you lost everything you had in the world. I don't know, it was insured. Everything burned. The next thing I know, we were back in Philly. Growing up with the mob, I always realized every time there was a serious problem with somebody, it was always because he told them some lie or he cheated. The guys that didn't do that had problems, but they were worked out. I seen guys, disappear. My father was a respected guy. This was his neighborhood. He actually he did a lot in this neighborhood because he was an old-time racket guy, especially when there was a troubled household. A young person was being abused and beaten by a drunken father. We interceded with a lot of that young guys growing up that had troubled childhoods and troubled homes. The years go by and then I'm in prison, and I think that's what led me in prison to be a mentor, educator, and I did the best I could to change a lot of lives from the cage. My father was a tall, good-looking guy. The marriage just has her ups and downs. My mom, she was a good wife all those years. He was very cultured, read a lot, liked to travel. During the day, strictly business. He was with Harry and Ange. He was with Harry first and then he was with Ange. But my father couldn't just leave Harry to go with Ange, so he stood with Harry, which he shouldn't have did. And that's when Harry made him deliver something and he got to 10 years. Harry explained it to me one time, before Ange became the boss. All your Northeast cities, Boston, New York, Philly, you had it's called Paiseias. That means, what type of Italian are you? Are you Sicilian? Are you Calabrese? Are you Napolitan? Are you Bruzzese? Your Bruzzese were along 7th Street. Your Calabreses were more in the Italian market. So each Paese had a boss. Nobody could really grow because there was too many bosses. The night of 1,000 sabers, Lucky killed them all because he couldn't get nothing done. Then was formed the Cosa Nostra.
Cosa Nostra means our thing in Italian. Traditional 5 mafia families out of New York that continue to today. Gambino, Genovese, Colombo, Bonanno, and Lucchese. They trace their roots all the way back to the 1910s and 1920s when the organization was first put together. And New York was the epicenter of organized crime, as it is the epicenter of so much else in America.
I was 19, I went to Baltimore. It was 2 solid blocks of bars. We went in there with cash, we bought 3. We bought the biggest one, was K's. It was my job, every 4 hours I used to clear out the register. And then I had a room full of booze. So I would administer the booze to each place. And every bar had to pay $5. I mean, 500. So I had to give 1,500 a week. Police car used to come down the strip, captain of the precinct, 2 motorcycles in the front, 2 motorcycles in the back. Philadelphia was having a mob war, and there was a lot of guys wind up getting found in alleyways and dumpsters and stuff like that. I'm having dinner. I hear, Georgie, put your hands on the table. Don't move. Put your hands on the table. Get up slow. Back away from the table. I said, who the hell are you? He said, homicide. I didn't know they found a gangster in the dumpster, Frank Sindone. Dumpster happened to be back in one of the restaurants we own. My friends in New York, they still can't figure out what's the matter with you people. You just kill, kill, kill. I said, I ain't got nothing to do with it. I'm not a made guy.
Used to be traditionally to become a made man, one, you had to be Italian on both sides, your mother and your father. And it also used to be to become a made man, you had to participate in a murder. Kill somebody, set somebody up, to get rid of the body, be culpable in some fashion. And then you would go through an initiation ceremony, a making ceremony. You go, you sit around the table, the boss, the underboss, they're all there, and they ask you if you want to be a part of this thing, and you say yeah. Then they prick your trigger finger, a little bit of blood trickles out, and they put it on a holy card. Then you crumple the holy card, put it in the middle of your hand. They set it on fire, and you say, may I burn like this saint in hell if I betray my family. That's what being a made man is. It's being a sworn member of this secret society, giving your body, your soul, your whole life to the organization.
I went into the weed business and declared myself. I say, listen, I got an opportunity to make money. My father, my godfather, I told them all, I got a chance to make money, goodbye. I had apartments all over the country, and each apartment had a wardrobe. When I got on a plane, all I did was walk on a plane. Marijuana comes in, you go check it out, you make sure it's got quality, and you make sure the price is right, and you sell it, you flip it. But I didn't sell it on the street in little nickel dime bags. I used to sell it to guys, you know, that wanted to move a lot. You got to remember, back in the day, Jamaica, South America, Central America, Mexico, there was no DEA. DEA were established in the mid-'80s. You'd be talking business under a gazebo. You hear shot, and the guy was just lined up against the wall and killed. No government intervention, interceding in anything. They had a complete autonomy. The most craziest country was Colombia. Then you had Central America, you had Mexico. I seen cocaine fields, rows and rows of these tubs. I actually seen where you couldn't see anymore. That's how many were lined up. You fly from Miami, I get a driver. Sure enough, we're on the highway, the back roads highway. We get stopped by a military checkpoint. They go under the seat of the car. This kid, he didn't listen. He's got a machine pistol. Now they think I'm selling guns to the guerrillas. So they take me, we go to a military compound. You throw me in a cell. But I was always smart. When I used to travel back in that days, I used to have secret pockets in my clothes. And I always used to carry 3 diamonds, 3 1-carat diamonds. So now they're telling me I'm going in front of the military tribunal, probably to be executed. And they took me, they said, we're going to shoot you against that wall. So I waited till the night, got a hold of a guard, went in my secret little pocket, showed him the diamond, said, telephone. And I made the call. Got lucky I got a hold of somebody in Barranquilla. I says, come with 20,000 US. Don't bring Colombian money. Come with 20,000 US. They were there the next day. The same people that were going to execute me, I was in the commander's office. We were drinking cognac. Said, you my best friend. Don't worry, I got marijuana for you. So we became buddies. And that was the last time I went there. I got out of there. Well, first of all, it was mainly legitimate. The weed was just, you know, I worked all my life, really worked hard. Worked all my life. I was only illegal, and my indictment says it, for 3 years. I never even had a parking ticket. When Ann's died, I had an opportunity to make some money with marijuana, and I took it. I worked all my life. You got to remember, my father went to prison when I was a kid, and I had 3 sisters, and my mother worked. And I wasn't going to let my sisters work for nothing. I worked after school, 8, 9 years old. Make sure my sisters had everything they wanted for school. So yeah, I worked.
George Martorano, the son of Raymond Long John Martorano, was a major player in the drug underworld. And at one point, authorities alleged George Martorano headed an organization that was generating $75 million a year.
Let's be frank, I was a marijuana dealer, but I was a marijuana dealer with no violence and wind up doing over 3 decades in the cage.
I prosecuted George Martorano, and I prosecuted him, and I worked with the FBI investigation of George Martorano in 1983. The fact as to what his drug dealing is all about is contained in this. It's his plea agreement. And the facts in this plea agreement,
That's what we need.
it's George's words in 104 recorded conversations.
There's nowhere else to go.
His words established that he was a drug kingpin. He had cocaine, he had Quaaludes, he had marijuana, he had heroin, and they were in massive amounts. It was marijuana so much that he actually had an airstrip in Florida that we confiscated. He was a business entrepreneur. He had a restaurant. He was street smart. He had phony identification. He went to Colombia to search out sources.
The government, since the beginning of time, has always put in the indictment, the also known as the AKA. It gives the government the ability to argue that these guys appear or sound more nefarious than they actually are. Invariably, at the state and local level, that prosecutor is going to say, this has a street value of $80 million. I've never seen $80 million in any drug house, no matter what the hell they were selling, no matter how much they were selling, no matter how much they were moving on a daily basis.
People say, well, when we look you up, there's other drugs in your case. And I said, sure, there's other drugs in my case. Because people are on tape saying that I was involved with cocaine, I was involved with meth. Indirectly, you might say I was, but all I did after a while, when you're on the street, so you lend people money, and they take the money and go into business, but they use your name. The people that the cocaine people, the meth people, the heroin, I never dealt in heroin, never. Street money has to stay in the street if you're smart. You never put it in anything legitimate. And that's why I had no violence. When a guy would owe money, just keep going. I'm not going to kill anybody over a plant.
The evidence was marijuana. Now, they may have jacked it up to justify the deal they cut.
When the government gets involved, they have the funds, the manpower. They have a case against you. You're going to go to jail.
The government wins more at the state level, and they unequivocally win more at the federal level. You tell me if it's fair when he's fighting an adversary that won 2 world wars and can print money. It's a very, very intimidating prospect to go up against the federal government. It just is. They have a ton of resources, and they sure as hell know how to use them.
There was no justice. He should have never got more than like 5 to 10 years. So the justice system and whoever the judge was at the time and whoever his lawyer was did him very wrongly.
They're about closing cases. They're about winning cases. They're not about justice at all.
That's where the problem comes in. It's what's the goal of a prosecutor? To win the case or to find the truth?
You get a lot of press. You become a very valuable client. The chances of winning are 1%.
It was September in North Miami, and I walked to the pool bar. I looked right at him. I told him, you rat son of a bitch. Before I said son of a bitch, there was 99 guns pointed at me. They had girls in the pool. They had guns in plastic bags. If I had known I did 32 years, I would have went like that.
When they come in and arrest you, and if it was government arrested, they get a notch on their belt. Even the prosecutor, the U.S. attorney. This is all career driven.
In state court, usually cases commence with law enforcement sees a crime, an arrest is made, then there's an investigation, then you go to court. The federal system, to a large extent, is the opposite. The federal system is, we're going to look at you for a few years. Then we're going to tap your phone. Then we're going to look through your trash. Then we're going to check your emails. Then we're going to read your text messages. Then we're going to talk to your friends. Then we're going to drop subpoenas to bring people in front of a grand jury. And then when that noose is just about cutting off both your blood and oxygen, then we're going to lock you up. So by the time the federal government arrests you, the cases are substantially stronger than most cases you see at the state level.
That was a big mistake, because when I put the cuffs on me in Miami, I had friends, top lawyers in Miami. I was on the phone a little bit with Philly. Nicky said, you got to take Bobby. You got to take Bobby.
Bobby was a really, really good criminal trial defense lawyer. He was one of those guys that made a specialty out of representing the mob guys. I have found that those guys are very selective in the lawyers they pick. And I think their first requirement is loyalty to them and that they keep their mouth shut.
Bobby Simone was Nick Scarfo's lawyer. He was Scarfo's personal friend. I believe that Bobby Simone was also Nick Scarfo's consigliere.
Bob Simone was Nicky's lawyer for a lot of years. Nicky had 2 or 3 murder trials that Simone beat. People don't know, Nicky never paid him. Nicky never paid him. So when it came, I'm in jail, facing life for the rest of my life. Nicky's out. He needs Simone to defend him. So what's it? So I went this way, and Simone went that way with Nicky.
It's well documented that the Martoranos were involved in drug trafficking. This goes back to Long John and to other members of his family, especially in South Jersey.
It was a time where crime was at its highest. And I think that it was getting so bad that the streets were really taking over.
Let us not forget that during the tenure of Angelo Bruno, he basically did not want narcotics trafficking a part of his regimen. Others, like Long John, engaged in drug trafficking with or without the approval of Bruno. And narcotics trafficking in South Jersey became an issue as to who was going to control it, whether it was New York or whether it was Philadelphia.
Nicky wanted me out of the way because I was so liked in New York. I was very friendly with New York before Nicky became Nicky. I was friendly with Nicky when he was doing a little construction in Atlantic City. Nicky had to be careful. New York would have said, what did you kill him for? What did you kill Joji for? What did he do? Well, if he did this, they would have questioned the parties involved. They couldn't say it was a rat because there was no paperwork to back that up. So Nicky had to be careful. The only way he could get rid of me was bury me in prison.
Even back then, when you saw the pictures of mob bosses slumped over at their steering wheel with bullet holes in the back of their head and all, that was organized crime. In other words, you knew it wasn't going to happen to you because these people did somebody in that organization wrong.
You got to understand the situation in Philadelphia. It was very quiet. There was no trouble, no violence on the streets for a very, very long time, and then it just exploded. A lot of homicides, a lot of murders, a lot of killings, and a lot of hits.
Angelo Bruno had a live and let live philosophy. Make money, don't make headlines, don't call attention to yourself. Violence is a negotiating tool of last resort. Scarfo becomes the boss in 1981, and that all changes. You know, Angelo Bruno, murder was a negotiating tool of last resort. If all else failed, somebody might get whacked. With Scarfo, murder was a calling card.
Nicodemo Starfo comes into play in 1981 and really changes the face of organized crime in Philadelphia.
Stevie Boris was head of the Greek mob in Philadelphia in the late 1970s, 1980s. Boris and his date go to dinner with Long John Martorano and Martorano's wife. Two gunmen walk in and they shoot Boris and they shoot and kill his date, Jeanette Curo. A guy named Neil Ferber. He gets arrested for the murder. And Ferber gets convicted of first-degree murder, sentenced to death. He's on death row. What comes out later is the jailhouse snitch failed a lie detector test when the police gave it to him, but the police didn't tell the DA's office. The word on the street and the word in law enforcement circles were, Long John Martorano set that up. And the shooters were the late Frankie Vedino and his son, George Martorano. If you start to look at Philadelphia in the early 1980s, beginning with the Bruno murder, there must have been 20, 25 murders over a 4 or 5 year period. This was just one of them.
When indictments come down, there's some kind of a wheel that evolves and the judge gets assigned to your case. Simone came and told me, he said, we got the worst judge, but the best judge. And when an attorney tells you got the worst judge and he says the best judge, I'm smart enough to not ask anymore.
My father was very much a no-nonsense person. And in fact, if you were to be sentenced in front of my father, it always made those that were going to be sentenced a little nervous because he could be tough. Dad knew Bobby Simone well as an outstanding lawyer in Philadelphia. Lawyers that knew Dad well, he would socialize with lawyers.
Pled to what I was offered, 10 years.
Judge Hannum was a character witness in Bobby Simone's tax evasion trial in U.S. court in Camden. After George Martorano pled guilty, but before Martorano was sentenced. In that window was when Hannum testified at that trial.
When Hannum made all the newspapers, got all that bad publicity with Simone, Simone came to me. Oh, it's not going to be 10, it's going to be 15. No way. He was just setting me up.
Here's Hannum, who testifies in Bobby Simone's trial as a character witness. Now he's got to sentence Simone's defendant, and he doesn't want to look like he's giving Simone a break. So he bends over backwards the other way. Should have never even been sentencing. Should have recused himself.
My dad being a character witness at Bobby Simone's trial was the typical example of Dad stepping forward. He was Dad's friend. He needed some support. Dad was going to be there.
George Martorano pleads guilty, and the guidelines for what he's pleading guilty to is 10 years no parole to life no parole. And ordinarily when you plead guilty, you get some kind of break. You know, instead of getting the maximum, you're going to somewhere between the minimum and the maximum, somewhere in the middle. Life in prison with no parole after you plead guilty, something was wrong there.
In 1980, you would have a plea agreement. You would have a plea if it was 1910. You would have a plea agreement. You just don't go in there nude. However, with George, it was a different story because Simone told him about his personal relationship with Judge Hannum.
When you have a gentleman dealing marijuana, when you have his adversary, the United States government, the Department of Justice, seeking a sentence of under 10 years, and the judge slams the hammer repeatedly by sentencing that man to a period of incarceration, which is the rest of his life. Something made that court depart dramatically above the applicable guideline range.
Judge Hannum generally would rule in favor of motions presented by the prosecution. Why he would sentence someone to life imprisonment when the government had recommended a 5 to 10 year sentence, I cannot speculate as to what was in his mind at that time.
I think George Martorano paid a price for the perception that he was a hitman. Was he a hitman? He denies it. I don't think anybody knows. But, you know, part of the problem with that whole case was because the DA screwed up in the beginning and arrested the wrong guy, again, human nature, they're never going to admit, oh, we were wrong. Here's the real shooters. Let's go get them now.
There was a lot of controversy associated with Judge Hannum on and off the bench.
Any speculation that Scarfo played a role in the maximum sentence begs the question that Hannum was in bed with Simone and Scarfo.
You got to remember, Simone got found guilty of RICO. He gets 4 years, comes out of jail, reinstates him.
Nothing surprised me about life in Philadelphia as it pertained to organized crime figures, their attempt to influence civilians, their relationship with attorneys, with members of common pleas court, and whether that extended into the federal courts, I don't know. Is there documentation to show of certain relationships with judges in the Philadelphia courts? Absolutely.
Bob Simone showed up at MCC New York on a Sunday night. So I need $150,000 to guarantee you you're going to get to 10 years. But I said, guess what? I'll give you $175,000 when I get to 10 years. A few days later, I get life, no parole.
Life without parole is goodbye. Never see you again. You're done. Raymond Long John Martorano, as long as Bruno was alive, didn't have to answer to anybody. Once Bruno was killed, then the tables were changed. And then it's, all right, who do I got to make nice to? John McCullough was killed. Raymond Martorano set that murder in motion.
Dad and Mr. John McCullough were friends and close friends. And if you were a close friend of Dad, he was very loyal to you.
Do you know what it is to be chained and put in a bus and driven from East Coast to West Coast? You know how many days it takes? You know how many prisons you're thrown in every night? They did that to me 3 times. And I wasn't worried about chained up and thrown in different cells every night across America for years. It was fighting madness. Fighting madness. Very simple. They wanted me to inform. You got to understand, my father was accused of killing the Irish boss. John McCullough was a boss. They hated my father. They couldn't get to him. They figured, let's put the pressure on the young Martorano because he's never been in prison. You know, my father was a gangster. He's been in prison. And his name came up everywhere, shape or form. Things were looking good. The guy get fined in a dumpster.
Putting George away for a long time in order to snitch on his father is actually one of the devices they use to get a said person to switch sides, as you will. You know, in other words, hey, we're going to give you life, or you could tell us this about your buddy or your dad or your wife or your brother or whatever the case may be, and we'll give you time off.
Oftentimes, a prosecutor will dangle the prospect of a more serious sentence and obviously a more serious charge to go with that sentence in order to induce someone to enter a plea of guilty. They'll also, of course, say, which you see in the federal system all the time, well, tell us what you know, and tell us what you know about this guy. And if you play ball with us concerning this guy and that guy, then we'll go easier on you. That happens in the American court system every single day. It's just criminal law, criminal justice 101.
George's father was apparently allegedly involved with the mob, and that spilled over into his case. That should never have spilled over into this case. There was pressure to do that. The prosecution makes recommendations on sentences, and the FBI theoretically provides the investigatory and factual basis for those recommendations. The FBI's influence was beyond just influencing the recommendation of sentence. It was apparently a broader influence, which is highly inappropriate.
When you have something to give to the government and you have a sweet deal for them to get someone else, just like the Sammy Gravano, John Gotti. When Sammy Gravano had 19 murders on him and he got 5 years, he should have been life or the electric chair or lethal injection, but he didn't because he had someone that he can roll over on.
In April of 1988, when George got resentenced, we had indicted Nicky Scarfo and 17 of his family of all the predicate crimes. There were 9 murders, 4 attempted murders. That case went to trial. If George wanted to, George could have come in and cooperated. Which, by the way, in the late 80s, we had mobsters who were coming in and cooperating. A guy like Phil Leonetti who got convicted in that case and got 45 years, and he was the underboss. So George could have cooperated, but he never did.
Eddie admitted to 10 murders, and he had a 45-year sentence. And that sentence was reduced to 5 years, 5 months, and 5 days. That's the deal he cut.
I don't bow my head before any man. I'd rather be dead. To have 2, 3 agents in front of me and break, to me, is I'd rather be dead.
For the government to come in and infiltrate organized crime, it was very hard for them to do that because it was such a close-knitted community of Italians and that were loyal to one another. You didn't hear about people cooperating in the 80s. You really didn't hear about it. I mean, when Sammy cooperated, that opened up the waters for everybody to jump in and start cooperating, because people didn't cooperate because they were afraid of getting killed.
Sammy the Bull killed 19 people. You tell me how that man walking the street helps society. Go talk to the family of those victims. See what their thoughts are on how society's been helped.
Public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
Right after President Reagan was elected, we adopted this very tough on crime philosophy, which permeated the entire criminal justice system, particularly drug crimes. You may remember Nancy Reagan's big issue was just say no. Quote, drugs were considered among the worst things that you can be involved in. And so we enacted draconian punishments. In fact, in some cases, we enhanced already draconian punishments. If you look at, for example, the Rockefeller laws in New York.
Dad's stance on the war on drugs in the 1980s was, I want to stamp that out and I will do everything I can. He was going to be tough.
I did not expect that, he would get life without parole on a guilty plea. So that did surprise me.
The people of this country think that they have this immaculate justice system. And unless you've come in contact with it, you view it as the Holy Grail. Come in contact with it, you think it's the worst thing on the face of the earth.
Federal judges have tremendous power. Tremendous power. You really ought to be careful about who you're appointing and why, but we're not. It's one of the many flaws in our political system currently.
The second half of the George Martorano story, when he went to prison, what he did while he was in prison, and how he basically rehabilitated himself, is an amazing story. I mean, if you look at his prison record, it's exemplary. While I can say, he was a kingpin, he paid the price for dealing drugs, I'm still amazed at what he was able to do while he was in jail. A lot of guys would have sulked, guys would have committed suicide, guys would have said, oh, I'm screwed, woe is me. He didn't do that, and for that he gets credit.
This is how you enter these kind of places. All prisons in America have 40-foot walls. So much death. I think the first prison riot I was in was at this place, Holmesburg Prison, a riot in the chow hall. It wasn't nothing nice. Believe me when I tell you, a lot of people were hacked. We would stand out in front of here for 2 hours in bad weather. Be guards around us with shotguns. You actually wanted to get inside of the hell. I've been through a lot in these places. This is only one. I can't remember how many places I've been chained up. You learn how to jail real quick when you're in solitary. If not, you ain't going to survive. Forget physically, mentally. You're not going to survive mentally. From the start, I've carried myself in the right light. Never give up on my dignity or character. It's so quick to lose them in these places. You just dropped into the trash can, the bottom of the barrel.
Life without parole means that you're locked up for the rest of your entire life. The size of his cell at Graterford was 6 feet by 8 feet. And most of the time it was that housed 2 inmates. It was a bunk bed, a desk, and a toilet sink. Any type of lockdown, they had 3 meals in their cell and they were there for 24 hours. Years, yes, they could be in isolation for years.
I was already a year in solitary, and then I was headed to Marion, New York gangster named Herbie Sperling. When I told him I was going to Marion, he put his head down. He said, George, I'm going to the worst prison. Forget about your case, forget about your appeal, forget about your family, forget about everything, but just stay alive. Who ran the prisons were the killers. Killers were the Aryan Brotherhood, Mexican Mafia,
the guerrilla black movement. These guys killed on a regular basis. I seen steel go through bodies, guys on the concrete floor. That steel went through their body so strong that sparks come out the other end.
That's the hardest federal prison you can go to. That's it. That's like almost like the Alcatraz of federal prison.
What did you say? I don't know why Philadelphia's doing to this, Martorano. I don't have you here. They do. The paperwork's not clear. It's always say you're on you're to be put in segregation or solitary for investigation for organized crime, murders. My indictment was nonviolent first offender. The warden say, well, what murders?
Solitary confinement, supermax prisons, that should not exist. 98% of people in prison get out. What do we want when they get out? What do we expect of them? And what do we do to make sure that what we expect of them is realistic given how they've been treated in prison?
Federal prison and state prison are two different types of prisons. When you go into maximum, which George was put in maximum security prison, that's hardcore criminals, even in federal prison. That's hardcore people that have committed murder, bank robbers that killed somebody. The worst of the worst is Marion Prison. I mean, that's where John Gotti was, 23 hours a day lockdown.
I go to the dungeons for about 2 years. My sentence is vacated. I'm brought back to MCC New York, thrown in a cell, no other than John Gotti. First night, we stood up, looked at each other man to man, and we shook hands. John was a gangster through and through, from when he got into life to when he went to the grave. You know, I was put in a hole for 90 days by Giuliani, who used to be prosecutor Giuliani. He did the famous commission case, it was all the 5 families. I made the headlines, New York papers, that George Martorano was the connection for the food, booze, and prostitutes from MCC New York. Well, I was making some move for some food, but not booze and prostitutes. I was saying, where's the prostitutes?
People call it school. You know, your father's away at school. I knew my father was in jail. As long as I got to see him, it didn't matter to me.
A man like I am and cares for his family, I always try to figure out ways, try to get a note out, borrow a stamp, write a letter to my family that I'm okay. Whatever they did to me, I could take. I couldn't care if they lashed me every night. But I was more concerned that my family knew that I was okay. In all those 32 plus years, I never once complained to anyone. My mother, my sisters, never. When I finally would get a communication through a phone call, visit, smile, happy, laugh, everything was fine. More concerned about their feelings than mine.
What's the purpose of prison? Is the purpose of prison to get even with the prisoner, or is it to make them a better person when they get out of prison? And if the goal is not retribution, but the goal is rehabilitation, then I think it's very compelling. At the very least, we have to make our prisons more humane, give them opportunities, give them training, and work through some of their issues. None of that is done in prison.
Everyone deserves a second chance in life, with the exception of those predators who have no remorse over what they've done.
The cost of housing a man or woman for the rest of their life in a federal institution is staggering.
My investigation, indictment, and incarceration court costs prior to my release came over $9 million. I did 32 plus years, and I was let out with $20.
It is big business. I mean, some of them are now run privately, and you really have to look long and hard at a business that makes its money on incarcerating people.
When you worked in the clothing facility, that was one of the best jobs to have. You can make up to 30 cents an hour.
I think you should give them a reasonable wage for the work they do.
Prisons need to be reformed so people have hope.
We don't care what happens to people when they get out.
1992, they took Pell Grants out of the federal prison system, so an inmate could only get his GED. So now in the late 90s, I was approached by one warden about this word re-entry. George, we're going to do this reentry. We'd like you to be a part of it. We'd like to know what you can do. And then I started creating these reentry classes. I graduated over 8,000 documented inmate students. It's easy to say, but try and do it. I was dying in jail. It was in paperwork. Why did I keep going? What made me keep going? What made me keep hoping? And I used to say to all my students, see you guys next week. And I always tell them, remember, prison, you always have tomorrow. I was with guys who were beasts. They had nothing behind their eyes. No emotion. But they listened to me. Why did they listen to me? I don't know. My classrooms were visited by staff. I'd be teaching and a lot of staff would just hear about how I taught and my programs. And they would just come and sit in the back of the room or stand in the back of the room. And you start seeing her around the compound and you get to talking and it just evolves. You usually meet certain parts of the prison in the evening. It wasn't all sex, Just so happy to be in a woman's company, just to hear her voice, see her smile. It happens a while. Like I had one relationship that lasted a long time, but I had to end it because it wasn't going anywhere, especially knew it wasn't going anywhere for me. I had life. So many prison stories that so funny. This guy comes to prison. He had an artificial leg, but the guy had a secret compartment in his leg. And he had cocaine hidden in the leg. He wound up getting with the right couple characters with this cocaine, and they partied. And he's out there on the flat trying to balance himself with one leg. And he's yelling up to me, Georgie, they got my leg. So I said, what? They got your leg? So I went down and he says, show me a note that if they don't give him the cocaine, they're going to destroy his leg. I wind up brokering his leg back. We paid some stamps. We paid some Haagen-Dazs ice cream. So we got his leg back. I said, for now on, make sure you keep it in the cell. Russell Buffalino, I knew him very well. We were in Leavenworth, and Russell lived next door. He always bought a little too much bananas, and I always rob a banana because I would like to have a banana with my cereal in the morning. And we had this conversation like numerous times. He says, Georgie, they don't think I know, but somebody's robbing my bananas. And I would have the banana. I said, what? You mean somebody went in your cell and taken your bananas? Well, guess what? That's a big problem. When we find out, I'll handle it personally. And I'm cutting the bananas. A couple of days go by, he says, that guy's still coming in and stealing the bananas. Funny part about it, all our friends knew, but nobody would rat me out. And he even went so far, he says, can you keep the bananas in your house so they don't come in your cell so they don't? I said, sure, but can I have one now and then? He said, sure. So he took the fun out of it. He took the fun out of it. I became a prolific poet from a broken heart after I lost loved one after loved one, and especially when I lost my son. And after my son, I lost my father to violence in the streets. It's called Lions Love Last. No one can know my life, for I'm the old lion left to roar. Here, in harsh land, I make myself seen and heard again and again. And yes, my legs are weak, yet I will not run. Alone, I am bound to roar to jackals, color of dun. So forgive me now, pain has slowed my claw. Forgive me now, 'tis time this old lion must fall. Thus, to all, only kneel before God and remember the old lion's roar.
It is damn close to mission impossible not to get the appeal. The difficulty is not getting an appeal after convicted. You have an absolute right to file an appeal to the appellate court, whether it's at the state level with a state conviction or the federal level with a federal conviction. It's the prevailing on the appeal that's very, very difficult. To get a conviction reversed is hard as hell. It really is next to mission impossible. Judges are very thorough to keep the record clean, to resolve any issues then and there at the trial level, so there's no controversy. And you have to have an issue that not only is a violation of law in and of itself, sometimes that may work, but sometimes you need an issue that's a violation of the law and the ability to show, but for my issue, I would have been found not guilty. Sometimes you have courts say, you know, you're right, Mr. Defendant. The judge screwed up. The prosecutor shouldn't have done that. However, we consider that error to be harmless because the totality of the evidence against you is such that you would have been convicted anyway.
There's guys in law enforcement, if something comes up, Martorano's appeal, or Martorano's asking for this, those guys, to the extent that they can have influence, are going to say, screw him. I'm not going to do anything to help him out. He got away with murder.
The fact that Mr. Martorano may be thought of as a trigger man in an unsolved homicide, okay. Obviously, there's not a modicum of evidence. There's been no arrest. I mean, think about this. The easiest way to charge a person is how? Convene a grand jury, okay? I tend to think if there was a scintilla of evidence that Mr. Martorano was involved in the shooting of Mr. Boris, there would have been a grand jury and there would have been an indictment.
That's just human nature. And that happens all the time. It's here's the facts, here's the evidence, here's the conviction, and here's the reality. And the reality is a mix of a lot of things, including things that law enforcement people know or believe that they can't prove or haven't been able to prove. That just happens. The system failed here. It didn't work. And it's one example. And I think it's also important, more important, because of what he did after he went to prison. And that's the amazing story.
I got out by creating the Holloway case, John Holloway case, in the Second Circuit that I utilized in the Third Circuit, where it was two-pronged. You had to meet two standards of the case, where you had to be languishing in prison and you had to have superior program. That means you had to have all kinds of activities as far as educational programs and stuff like that. Either you become a beast or you become better. Prevented a Conair hijacking in 2010. We took estranged fathers. We would try to arrange visits. You know, you get to know yourself, number one, and you get to know other individuals. Because when you're in solitary, what's your sense of lying? The guy's talking to you through the vent. He's pouring his heart out. He ain't lying. So you get to know people when you're in solitary.
It was 2003 when I met Georgie face to face for the first time. And it was October 2015, the first time I saw him as a free man. It's not fun to go to a federal penitentiary. It's not fun to go to a prison to see your loved one. So I made a commitment to him that I would get there every week. And the more we talked, the more ideas we came up with. Because I told him, I said, George, I'm not an attorney. I've got street smarts, and my street smarts tell me that you don't belong in here, and I'm going to do everything I can to try and get you out. My first trip to Washington was a disaster. And I came home frustrated, and Georgie's sister said, let's cut your hair, push you in a nice suit, and send you back up there and see what happens. And now I'm shaking hands with Bill Nelson and various Congress members. I kind of started to understand why the federal prison system was as screwed up as it actually was. It's because we have people in Washington that don't actually know anything about it themselves. I call them bobbleheads. I said, they're bobbleheads. They sit there and they go like this, George. And then when you leave, they probably shrug their shoulders. I found out that the only way Georgie was going to come home was through the court system. Roy Black got involved. He says, I went through the files. He said, and this is the most extreme case of injustice when it came to sentencing that I've ever seen in my career. Roy Black argued against Andrea Folk, the prosecutor. And they don't really have to give you any reason. They just say denied. We went through the parole commission. Naturally, you got to fill out all these crazy forms. And we sent it in, and they sent it over to the White House. They approved it and sent it to the White House for approval from the president for a commutation of sentence. It sat there. It sat there until he left office. And then it goes mute. You got to redo for the next president. Probably 3 years later, we decided to send the judge a letter. Prater got the letter, and she wanted to meet with the attorneys of record about the letter.
I was assigned the case in 2009. I also had a related case, which may have been the reason I was assigned, involving his son, who was acquitted of a drug charge and unfortunately died a year later. My concern was that commutation might be either politically complicated because he had really such a bad series of offenses, and it wouldn't be soon enough. He was in a situation where there was not much that could be done about his life sentence on the basis of just appealing or post-conviction hearings. After the motion that involved Roy Black was argued in district court and rejected, and then we argued in the Third Circuit, and the Third Circuit affirmed its rejection. He wrote a pro se letter or a motion to the judge, and he cited the Holloway case. Now, the Holloway case was a sort of one-off, but given the fact that Mr. Martorano had such an unusual record, the judge was curious as to whether or not we were looking into what was happening in his situation. And at that point, I'd already been working on this for a year. I had an FBI agent actually going out and doing interviews for me and tracking things down. But that is when Ted Simon came into the picture and started bringing me more documentation of the bigger picture. One of the lieutenants said to me, if anyone deserves to be freed as a result of his activity, it was Mr. Martorano. That spoke truly volumes to me, and that sentiment was repeated with virtually everyone else at his institution. At the time, it was Coleman, but it was also true really all the way back for at least 20 years in the other institutions where he was. He had a completely clean prison record. It's almost unheard of. There were a number of ways he made these institutions safer. He was involved in suicide intervention. He helped to make sure that inmates who needed medication took their medication. He provided all these courses that showed inmates that the way they were behaving on the street was wrong, that they shouldn't behave violently. They shouldn't behave violently amongst each other in the prison. I read some amazing letters from inmates who said that George Martorano completely changed their way of thinking about society and their life and how to cope. His interaction with the inmates made the institution safer. It just did. And not only safer, but better. I mean, there should be a George Martorano in every prison. There really should. I wish we could clone him. Ultimately, after going through everything, I petitioned my office to approve our filing a motion to release Mr. Martorano and allow the judge to resentence him to time served. The people running the prison at Coleman were his biggest advocates to get this relief. And when they heard it, it was in fact a party. It was joyous. It was a joyous occasion. And they did everything they could to just make sure everything was taken care of, the paperwork was done. And I believe it was just the very next day that he was finally released. It was a really happy occasion. I have to say that, our job as prosecutors, obviously, is to investigate crimes and put people in jail if necessary. But it's one of our greatest joys to be able to do something like this. I mean, this is entirely consistent with doing justice and making the justice system work for everybody. So it's one of my prouder moments. And Ted was down there and he was calling me and giving me a point by point what was going on down there. One of the amazing things about George Martorano is that with all of the motions that he filed, he never asked for any benefit for everything that he was doing. He did that to make things better. He was not doing this because he thought it would get him out of jail. He was doing this because he cared and he wanted to make their lives better, knowing that he may not ever see outside of prison and that this would never help him. He did it for others. And that's a really unique quality. It's a unique quality outside the prison. I don't know that there are too many others that would ever measure up to what he's done.
Monday evening, I walked into this house, and at the table over there was sitting Georgie and Theodore Simon. And his sister was standing right here in the kitchen. What a feeling. What a feeling. And now I see Georgie out here, and I know why. Because he's smiling, and he's doing what he wants to do. And he's becoming successful legally.
Every morning when I get up and I'm free, I always start out with a big chuckle. Because literally I was supposed to die in prison.
Like it never, like no time ever went by. A lot of people like look at me when I say that like I'm crazy. But it's like no time went by. We clicked.
I'm in my home. It's been in my life since 1952. This home to me is the love relationship, but I also fight much sorrow. You know, I lost loved ones in this home. My wife, my son, my mother, my father. You cannot run away from history. You cannot run away from love. You cannot even run away from sorrow. You must stay the course. It's easy to run, but it's very hard to stay. And I'm going to stay here. I try to bring as much joy into the house as I can and the right perspective, especially for my daughter. My life's all about my daughter right now. She was only 4 years old when I went to prison. To me, she's just still the little girl that I left behind. And people go to the movies and read books that have been in this home. My godfather, Angelo Bruno, Frank Sinatra, my father, Long John. It's such a history. All walks of life, politically, gangsters, professionals. This house has had them all here for dinner parties and so many memories, good and bad. I was home like 72 hours and I was booked all over Florida to speak with these organizations. I got to hearing about the CBD. I knew about marijuana, but I didn't know about CBD. I learned all I can. You remember, I went away from marijuana. Then I come out in the CBD. Right now, I'm in the relaxation factor of the industry. And I even have my own brand. It's called the Grow Father. And the Grow Father helping a lot of people that are emotionally and physically ill.